Let me tell you something I've never told anybody, not properly, not the whole thing. I was there, on the deck of the Marrow, when it happened, when the whole galaxy stopped laughing at us all at once, like somebody had reached out and turned off a sound that had been playing my entire life. But I'm getting ahead of myself. That's the problem with a story like this. You want to jump straight to the part where the sky lit up, where the big ships came apart. But that part doesn't mean anything unless you understand what came before it, unless you understand what it was like to be human back then. So let me slow down. Let me start where it actually started. For me, anyway. I grew up on a rock called Tessum Drift. You've probably never heard of it, and there's no reason you should have. It was a mining station bolted to the side of a dead asteroid, out on the edge of what everybody called the Quiet Arm. The Quiet Arm was where they put us. Humanity, I mean. Not officially. Nobody ever signed a paper that said put the humans in the corner. But that's where we ended up. Way out on the rim, where the good trade routes didn't run, where the air recyclers were 40 years old and coughed like a dying man, where you could look out the window and not see another star system's lights for weeks. The Quiet Arm. Even the name was an insult if you thought about it long enough, and I thought about it plenty. My father worked the ore lines. My mother patched suits. That was the whole economy of Tessum Drift. You dug rocks out of a bigger rock, you ran them through a smelter that broke down every third day, and then a trade ship came by once a month to buy what you'd made. And when that trade ship came, it was never one of ours. It was always somebody else's. The Veil, usually, or the Korathi. Sometimes a Scenic freighter, all covered in those glowing barnacle things they grew on their hulls for luck. And here's the thing I remember most about those trade days, the way they looked at us. I was maybe 9 the first time I really noticed it. My father took me down to the docking ring to watch the unloading. He wanted me to understand the work, he said. Understand where the credits came from. So I stood there in my 2 big boots, holding his hand, and I watched a Korathi trader come down the ramp of his ship. He was tall. They all were, the Korathi. 7 feet of gray muscle and those long fingers that split into 3 at the tip. He wore a coat that shimmered when he moved, the kind of fabric we could never make, the kind that cost more than my father earned in a year. And he walked down that ramp and he stopped, and he looked around at Tessum Drift. At the rust, at the flickering lights, at the humans standing around in their patched coveralls. And he laughed. It wasn't a loud laugh. That's what got me. It was quiet, almost gentle, like you'd laugh at a child who'd drawn you a picture of something that didn't look like anything. He said something to the human dockmaster, and the dockmaster smiled this tight, awful smile and nodded, and the Korathi laughed again and walked off to do his business. I asked my father what the trader had said. My father didn't answer for a long time. Then he crouched down next to me, and he looked me in the eye and he said we build things like we're afraid of them. I didn't understand it then. I thought about it for years and years. And you know what? He was right. The Korathi was right. Everything we built out there in the Quiet Arm we built scared. Scared it would break. Scared we couldn't fix it. Scared there wasn't enough of anything to go around, so we made everything small and thin and cheap and just barely good enough to not kill us most of the time. That was humanity back then. To the rest of the galaxy, we were the folks who built things like we were afraid of them, and they weren't entirely wrong. You have to understand what the galaxy was back before. It wasn't one thing. It was 100 things all tangled together, all older than us by a long shot. The oldest were the Veil. Nobody knew how old exactly. They didn't like to say. They were the ones who'd wired up the big jump gates that let everybody travel between the stars in weeks instead of centuries, and they charged a toll for every single crossing, and they'd been charging that toll for longer than humans had been walking upright. The Veil didn't fight wars. They didn't have to. They just controlled the roads, and if you crossed them, one day your gate access simply stopped working, and then you were stuck in your own little system with no way out, and everybody watched you slowly rot. Below the veil were the Korathi, who ran most of the trade, and the Senek, who were bankers and grew their weird luck barnacles and knew where all the money was buried, and the Threll, who made the best ships in the galaxy, gorgeous curved things that looked like they'd grown instead of been built, and a dozen others, each with their patch of stars, each with their pride, each with their long, long history. And then there was us. Humanity had come out into the galaxy maybe 200 years before I was born. We'd figured out our own rough kind of star drive, a clunky thing compared to the Veil gates, but it worked, and we'd gone poking around looking for a place to live because Earth was crowded and tired and we'd made a mess of it. And what we'd found was that all the good places were already taken. Every green world, every rich asteroid belt, every warm little system near a stable star, taken, claimed, spoken for by races who'd been out here since before we'd learned to make fire. So we got the leftovers, the quiet arm, the dead rocks nobody else wanted, and we were told in that gentle laughing way the galaxy had that we should be grateful, that the older races were being generous, letting us stay at all, that we were young and small and weak, and if we knew what was good for us, we'd keep our heads down and dig our ore and pay our tolls and not make any trouble. And for a long time, that's exactly what we did. I left Tessum Drift when I was 17, signed up with the fleet. Now I have to explain something about the fleet because when I say fleet, you're probably picturing something grand. Rows of warships, marching soldiers, flags. It wasn't like that. The human fleet back then was a joke. Even we knew it was a joke. We had maybe 200 ships across all of human space, and most of them were converted freighters with a couple of guns bolted on. We had no real warships, because building real warships cost real money, and we didn't have real money. And anyway, the Veil had rules about how big and how armed a young race's defense force was allowed to be. Rules they enforced by controlling the gates. Get too big for your britches, and one day your gate access stops working, and then how are you going to defend anything? So the fleet was small, and old, and underfunded, and everybody in the galaxy knew we couldn't fight our way out of a wet paper bag, and honestly, so did we. I joined because there was nothing else, because I didn't want to dig ore and patch suits until my lungs gave out like my father's did. Because the fleet at least meant seeing other stars, even if it was just running patrol along trade routes that weren't ours to protect, watching for pirates we weren't really equipped to stop, saluting Korathi and Veil captains who outranked us in every way that the galaxy counted, even when they held no rank at all. My first posting was on a patrol boat called the Sparrow, 40 years old, held together with prayer and spare parts. We had a captain named Odal Ferreira, a woman about 50 with gray in her hair and the tiredest eyes I've ever seen on a living person. Not sad, just tired. The kind of tired you get from a whole career of biting your tongue. I remember the first time I saw her bite it. We were docked at a Veil way station, one of the big ring-shaped things they built around the jump gates. We'd come in for resupply, and there was a line, and we waited in the line like we were supposed to. And a Korathi luxury cruiser came in behind us. And the Veil station master, a pale drifting thing that spoke through a translation box, waved the Korathi cruiser right past us to the front. Captain Ferreira keyed her calm and said, real polite, that we'd been waiting 3 hours and could we please keep our place in line. And the Veil station master said, I'll never forget it. The Veil station master said, your place in line is wherever we decide it is. Be grateful you are permitted to wait at all. And Captain Ferreira said, understood, thank you, and she closed the comm. And she sat there in the command chair with her jaw working, biting down on every single thing she wanted to say. Because if she said any of it, the Sparrow might find its gate access revoked, and then 40 crew would be stranded, and it wouldn't change a single thing anyway. I was 18, I watched her swallow it, and I thought that's what it means to be human out here. You swallow it your whole life. I didn't know yet that somewhere, on a rock even further out than Tessum Drift, there were people who decided to stop swallowing. Her name was Dr. Present Aventes. That was actually her name, Present. Her parents had been colonists, part of a wave that believed in fresh starts, and they'd named their kids things like Present and Onward and Begin. I met her years later, and she told me the name used to embarrass her when she was young. By the time I met her, nobody laughed at her name anymore. By the time I met her, nobody laughed at anything she did. But back then, back when this story really starts, she was just a physicist working on a research station called Deepwell, way out past the edge of the settled quiet arm, in a system with no name, just a number. A dead system. No habitable worlds. Just a cold star and a scatter of frozen rocks, and buried in one of those rocks, a research base that the fleet funded when it remembered to, which wasn't often. Deepwell was where humanity put the ideas that were too strange or too expensive to try anywhere else. It was where you got posted if you were brilliant and difficult and didn't play well with the people who controlled the budgets. Present Aventes was all three. She'd been chasing something for years, an idea that everybody told her was impossible. See, the whole reason humanity was stuck was the gates, the Veil gates. We couldn't go anywhere without them, and we couldn't build our own because gate technology was a closely guarded Veil secret, and every attempt any young race had ever made to reverse engineer a gate had ended in either failure or a very sudden, very final visit from Veil enforcers. The Veil did not share the roads. The roads were how they ruled. But Present Aventes wasn't trying to build a gate. She was trying to build something that didn't need one. I want to tell you about the night I first heard her name, because it matters to what comes later. I was 23 by then, still on patrol duty, though I'd moved up to a slightly less terrible ship, a corvette called the Redgrave. We were docked at a human station called Harrow's Reach for a maintenance cycle, and I was in the mess hall, and there was a news broadcast playing on the old cracked screen up in the corner. Human news, which was rare. Most of what we watched was galactic news, and galactic news mentioned humanity about as often as you'd mention an ant colony you'd noticed in your garden. But this was a human broadcast, and it was talking about a breakthrough at a research facility, and a bunch of us looked up because human breakthrough was almost a punchline. What did we break through at this time? A better ore smelter, a cheaper air filter. But the woman on the screen, some fleet science liaison, was talking about a new kind of drive. A fold drive, she called it. She was careful. She was vague. She said it was very early and not yet practical and years from any application. All the words you use when you don't want to promise too much. But she said one thing that stuck with me. She said, for the first time, a human ship has moved between 2 points in space without using a Veil gate. It moved a very short distance, but it moved. And the mess hall got quiet. Because we all understood in that dumb animal way you understand things before your brain catches up, that if it was true, if a human ship could really move without the gates, then everything might be different. Everything. The tolls, the lines we waited in, the gentle laughing, all of it hung on the gates. All of it hung on us needing them and them not needing us. And then some cynic down the table, there's always one, said, it's a lie, or it's a trick, or the Veil will shut it down by next week. Don't get your hopes up, we don't get to have nice things. And everybody laughed because he was probably right, and because getting your hopes up was the most dangerous thing a human could do. Hope had a way of getting punished out there. I laughed too, but I wrote the name down, Deepwell. Aventes Fold Drive. I don't know why, I just felt like I should remember it. 2 years passed, nothing happened, or nothing seemed to. The cynic in the mess hall, it turned out, was half right. The Veil did notice. Of course they noticed everything. And they didn't shut it down exactly. That wasn't their style. Their style was quieter and worse. What they did was, they issued what they called a guidance. A formal statement to all the young races, humanity included. And the guidance said, in that flat, cold Vale way, that unauthorized transit technology was a violation of the Compact of Roads, and that any race found to be developing such technology would face correction. Correction, that was the word. They never said what it meant. They didn't have to. Everybody remembered the Juno. You don't know about the Juno. There's no reason you would. It's not in the histories the older races keep. But every human knew it, the way you know a scar on your own body. The Juno were a race a little older than us. They'd come out into the galaxy about the same time, maybe a century before, and they'd been just as poor and just as pushed around as we were. And at some point, the Juno decided they were done being pushed. They started building ships, a real fleet. They were going to make the galaxy respect them. And one day the Juno's gate access stopped working. All of it, every gate all at once. And the Juno were trapped in their own little cluster of systems, cut off from the trade they needed to survive, cut off from the food they imported, cut off from everything. And the galaxy just watched the Juno starve. It took about 8 years. And when it was over, the Juno were gone, and their worlds were quietly redistributed to races who knew how to keep their heads down. And the whole thing became a story that older races told their children as a lesson about patience and humility and knowing your place. That was correction. That was what the veil meant. So when the guidance came out, when the word correction appeared in that cold, flat statement, the human government did what human governments always did. They folded. They issued their own statement saying that all transit research was being suspended pending review, and that humanity respected the Compact of Roads and had no wish to cause instability. They shut down Deepwell, officially. They pulled the funding, recalled the staff, and let the galaxy see them do it, so the Veil would be satisfied that the ants had learned their lesson. That's what the galaxy saw. Here's what actually happened. I learned this part later, years later, from President Aventis herself, sitting across a metal table from me with a cup of that terrible recycled coffee we all drank, telling me the story of what she did when the order came to shut down her life's work. She didn't shut it down. She'd seen the guidance coming. She wasn't stupid. She'd been watching the Veil watch her for 2 years. So when the order came, she was ready. She'd already moved. She and about 40 others, the true believers, the ones who couldn't let it go, they'd quietly relocated the real work. Not the public lab at Deepwell. The public lab they let the government close, made a big show of it, wheeled out the equipment on camera. That was theater. The real work went dark. It went to a place that didn't have a name and didn't appear on any registry and wasn't funded by any government that could be leaned on. It went to an old mining hollow, a played-out asteroid that a human corporation had abandoned decades before, deep in a debris field where the rocks were thick enough to hide a base from any sensor sweep. And there, in the dark, in secret, cut off from resupply, running on stolen power and scavenged parts, 40 humans kept building the thing the galaxy had told them they weren't allowed to have. I asked her why. When she told me the story, I asked her why risk it. You knew what correction meant. You knew about the Juno. Why not just swallow it like the rest of us did? And she looked at me with these very clear eyes, and she said something I've carried with me ever since. She said, because I did the math, and the math said we could win. And once you know you can win, swallowing it isn't humility anymore. It's just cowardice with better manners. Now I have to tell you about the ship, because none of this is about drives or physics or politics, not really. It's about the ship. It's about the Marrow. But to tell you about the Marrow, I have to tell you about the man who built her. And to do that, I have to back up again, and I promise this is the last time I back up, and then we go forward and we don't stop. His name was Gideon Vale. And Gideon Vale was, by every account including his own, an absolute nightmare of a human being. He was a shipwright, the best humanity had, which was a strange thing to be, because humanity's ships were famously bad. But being the best shipwright among a people who built things scared meant Gideon Vale spent his whole life staring at the ceiling of what he was allowed to build, and hating it, and dreaming about what he'd make if anybody ever cut him loose. He was old by the time this story reaches him, 70-some. He'd built freighters and patrol boats and ore haulers, thousands of them, competent and cheap and forgettable, exactly as required. And he'd hated every rivet, because Gideon Vale didn't want to build things that were afraid of themselves. Gideon Vale wanted to build something that the galaxy would look at and stop laughing. He and President Aventis found each other. Of course they did. The two most stubborn humans in existence, both told no by the same galaxy, both refusing to accept it. She had a drive that didn't need the gates. He had a lifetime of designs he'd never been allowed to build. Between them, they had a plan that everybody sane would have called suicide. They were going to build a warship. Not a converted freighter with guns bolted on. A real warship. A ship built the way the Threll built theirs, the way the Korathi built theirs, the way humanity had never been permitted to build. A ship that could fight. And they were going to put President Aventis's fold drive in it, so it could go anywhere, gates or no gates. And they were going to do it in secret, in the dark, in a played-out asteroid in a debris field, with 40 scientists and a crew of shipwrights and mechanics who'd been quietly recruited from the best humanity had. And they were going to name her the Marrow, because Gideon Vale said that's where blood is made, deep in the bone where nobody can see it in the dark. That's where you make the thing that keeps you alive, in the marrow. I told you he was a nightmare, but the man could turn a phrase. I want to be honest with you about something. When I tell this story, it's easy to make it sound like everybody knew, like all of humanity was in on some grand secret plan and just waiting for the day. We weren't. Almost nobody knew. That was the whole point. If humanity had known, the Veil would have known, because there were always informers, always somebody willing to sell a secret for a better place in line. So the Marrow was built by a few hundred people at most, and the rest of us, the rest of humanity, all the billions of us scattered across the quiet arm, we knew nothing. We went on digging ore and patching suits and swallowing insults and waiting in lines that would never move for us. I was one of the ants who didn't know, right up until the day I did. Here's how I found out. I was 26. I'd made lieutenant, which on a human ship meant almost nothing, but it meant I got to sit in on briefings, and one day I got called into a briefing that wasn't like the others. There were 4 of us, me and 3 others, all young officers, all with something in common that I didn't understand until later. We were all from the deep quiet arm, all from the poorest rocks, all people who'd grown up watching the galaxy laugh. And we were all, every one of us, people who'd gotten in trouble at some point for not swallowing it well enough. I had a mark on my record. I'd said something to a Korathi officer once that I shouldn't have. It had nearly ended my career. Instead, it turned out, it had put me on a list. The briefing was run by a woman I'd never seen before. She wasn't in fleet uniform. She was in plain gray coveralls, and she had the look of somebody who hadn't slept properly in about a decade. She didn't give her name. She just started talking. She said, "Everything you're about to hear is a secret you will keep or die keeping. If that's not something you can promise, the door is behind you, and there's no shame in walking through it, and you'll be reassigned, and you'll forget this room ever existed." None of us walked through the door. And then she told us about Deepwell, about the Fold Drive, about President Aventis and Gideon Vale and the base in the debris field, about the Marrow. And then she told us why we were there. The Marrow was almost finished. She needed a crew. Not a big crew. She was built to run lean, built for people who knew how to do everything themselves because there'd be nobody to help them. And they wanted people who understood in their bones what the ship was for, people who'd grown up under the laughing, people who wouldn't lose their nerve when the moment came. She looked at the 4 of us and she said, "We're not asking you to be heroes. We're asking you to be witnesses, to crew a ship that's going to do something no human ship has ever done, and maybe, if it works, to change what it means to be human out here. Forever. I didn't say anything for a long time. I was thinking about my father, crouched down next to 9-year-old me on the docking ring, telling me what the Korathi had said. He said, "We build things like we're afraid of them." And I thought, maybe not anymore. I said yes. We all said yes. They took us out to the debris field on a freighter with a false manifest. 6 weeks of travel, most of it dark and boring, and then we came in through the rocks, threading between asteroids the size of moons, and the pilot did it all on manual because you couldn't run active sensors out there without lighting yourself up for anybody watching. And then we came around a rock the size of a city, and I saw her for the first time. The Marrow. I need you to understand what it was like, because I'd spent my whole life around human ships, and human ships were sad little things, patched and rusted and apologetic. Everything about a human ship said, "Sorry, sorry. We know we don't belong here, sorry." The Marrow did not apologize for anything. She was long and dark and lean, and she was built out of some black composite that drank the light instead of reflecting it, so she looked less like a ship and more like a piece of the space around her that had decided to have edges. She was maybe 400 meters, which by galactic standards was medium-sized, nothing to the great Korathi cruisers or the Veil Ring stations. But she wasn't built to be big. She was built to be fast and mean, and she carried her weapons the way a knife fighter carries a knife, close and ready, and without any wasted motion. Gideon Vale had built her, and you could see the hate in every line of her. The hate for every scared, apologetic thing he'd been forced to make his whole life. She was his revenge on all of it. She was the thing he'd been dreaming about since he was a boy watching traders laugh at his home. I stood at the viewport of that freighter and I looked at her, and I felt something I'd never felt before in my whole human life. I felt proud. They put us aboard, and I met the rest of the crew, and I met President Aventis and Gideon Vale, and I spent the next 4 months learning a ship unlike anything I'd ever imagined. The fold drive was the heart of her. I won't pretend I understood the physics. Present tried to explain it to me once, and my brain slid off it like water off glass. But the gist was that instead of traveling through space, the Marrow folded it. Brought 2 distant points together, touched them, stepped across, let them spring apart again. No gate needed, no toll, no permission. She could be in one system and then, in the space of a held breath, be in another, 100 light years away, with nobody's leave but her own. Do you understand what that meant? Do you understand what that broke? The whole order of the galaxy, the whole thing, the veil on top, the tolls, the lines, the corrections, the gentle laughing, all of it rested on one single fact, that the veil controlled the roads and everybody else needed them. The Marrow didn't need the roads. The Marrow made her own. Gideon Vale died before she ever flew. Did I mention that? His heart gave out about 3 weeks before the Marrow was ready. 78 years old, 40 of them building things he hated, and 4 of them building the one thing he loved, and he didn't quite make it to see her move. They held a small service. There wasn't much anybody could say. President Aventis stood up and she was quiet for a long time, and then she said, "He built her scared of nothing. Let's not embarrass him." And that was it. That was the whole eulogy. And it was perfect, and everybody knew it was perfect, and nobody said another word. We buried him in space, near the ship. And then we got back to work. Because that's what he would have wanted, and because the galaxy was still out there laughing, and we had a ship now that was going to make it stop. I remember the last night before we flew. I couldn't sleep, none of us could. I went up to the observation deck, a little bubble of reinforced glass near the Marrow's spine, and I sat there looking out at the debris field, at all those tumbling rocks, at the cold, distant star. And President Aventis came and sat down next to me. She had 2 cups of that terrible coffee, and she handed me one without a word, and we sat there for a while. Finally, I asked her the question I'd been carrying since the briefing room. I asked her, what if it doesn't work? Not the drive. I mean, what if we do this and it works and the galaxy just crushes us anyway? What if we show them we can build a real ship and they just build 1,000 real ships and wipe us out? We're not fixing anything. We're just poking the bear. She thought about it for a long time. That was her way. She never answered fast. Then she said, you're assuming they can build 1,000 ships and come find us. But think about it. Think about how the galaxy actually works. Every one of those older races hates the others almost as much as they hate us. The Korathi and the Threll haven't spoken in 100 years. The Senate would sell their own mothers before they'd spend money on a war that didn't profit them. The only thing that keeps them all in line, the only thing that lets the Veil rule all of them is the gates, is the roads. Take away the roads, and they're not a galaxy anymore. They're 100 little kingdoms who suddenly can't reach each other. She sipped her coffee. We're not poking the bear, she said. We're the only ones in the whole galaxy who just figured out how to walk out of the cage. And once we can do that, once they see we can do that, every other race in that cage is going to want to know how. And the Veil can't correct all of them. They can't starve everybody. The whole system only works because nobody believes there's a way out. She looked at me. We're the proof there's a way out. That's the weapon, not the guns, the proof. I sat with that. And then I asked her the other question, the one I was more afraid of. When we go out there, I said, the first time, what do you think happens? And she smiled. She almost never smiled, and she said, I think, for the first time in 200 years, the galaxy is going to be surprised by us. And I've spent my whole life wondering what that would look like. The next morning we flew. I was at my station. I'd trained as a combat systems officer, which on the Marrow meant I was responsible for the ship's teeth, all those knife-close weapons Gideon Vale had built into her hull. Present was in the command chair, not because she was a soldier, she wasn't, but because it was her ship in every way that mattered and nobody argued. She keyed the intercom and spoke to the whole crew, 51 of us. That was all. 51 humans about to do the thing the galaxy had promised to correct us for. She said, I'm not going to give a speech. Gideon would have hated a speech. I'll just tell you where we're going. A pause. There's a railway station, a big one. It sits at the Threll Junction, the busiest crossing in this whole part of the galaxy. Every day, thousands of ships pass through it. Korathi, Threll, Senec, Vale, everybody. They line up and they pay the toll and they cross the gate, and they've done it that way for 10,000 years. Another pause. We're not going to line up. We're not going to pay the toll. We're going to fold in right on top of that way station, where everyone can see us in the middle of the busiest day of the year. And then we're going to fold out again to a system on the other side of that gate, without using the gate, in front of the whole galaxy. I felt my heart going. I looked around the bridge. Everybody was very still. We're not going to fire a shot, Present said. We're not going to hurt anyone. We're just going to let them see us do the one thing they said was impossible. And then we're going to leave, before they can do anything about it. She let that sit for a second. They've been laughing at us for 200 years, she said. Let's see if they're still laughing after today. And she gave the order. And the fold drive spun up, this deep sound that you felt in your teeth more than heard. And the debris field outside the viewport seemed to lean, to bend, to fold. And we were gone. I've tried to describe the fold 100 times, and I've never gotten it right. People ask me what it feels like. And I say things like, it feels like being turned inside out for exactly no time at all. Or, it feels like a word you know but can't remember and then you remember it. Or, it feels like nothing and the nothing is the whole point. But those are all wrong. The truth is your body doesn't have any way to file the experience. You go in, and there's this moment where space itself leans over sideways and the stars smear, and your insides do something they've never done before, and then it's over and you're somewhere else, and part of your brain is still standing back in the place you left, waiting for you to catch up. I felt it, and when the smear cleared and my eyes worked again, I was looking through the viewport at the Threll Junction. And I forgot how to breathe. You have to understand the scale of the place. The Threll Junction wasn't a station. It was a city. It was a nation. The Vale Gate at its heart was a ring of dark metal 50 kilometers across, humming with power that made the Marrow's fold drive look like a candle next to a bonfire. And around that gate, the Vale had built rings inside rings inside rings, docking arms reaching out for hundreds of kilometers, way stations and fuel depots and market platforms, all of it lit up gold and blue and burning white, all of it older than human civilization. And the ships. I had never seen so many ships in my life. There were thousands of them. Great Korathi trade cruisers, long and gray and studded with cargo pods. Threll vessels, those gorgeous grown-looking things, curved like seashells, iridescent. Scenic banking barges crusted with their glowing luck barnacles. Vale enforcement craft, pale and smooth and terrible, drifting through the traffic like sharks through a school of fish. And 100 other kinds of ship from 100 other races, all of them in the great slow line, all of them waiting their turn, all of them paying the toll to cross. The line. Even here at the center of the galaxy's power, everybody waited in the line. And we had just folded in right on top of all of it. We hadn't waited, we hadn't lined up, we hadn't paid. We had simply appeared out of nothing in a spot where, according to every law of physics the galaxy believed in, no ship could possibly be. For about 3 seconds, nothing happened. I really think, the galaxy just didn't understand what it was seeing. There was a human ship, a small dark human ship, sitting in the sacred space right beside the Great Vale Gate, in a place it could not possibly have reached, because the only way to reach it was through the gate, and the gate log said nothing had crossed. 3 seconds of the galaxy trying to file an experience its brain had no folder for. And then every alarm in the Threll Junction went off at once. The comms lit up. Present had them piped to the bridge speakers, and it was chaos, 100 voices in a dozen languages, the translation boxes struggling to keep up, everybody talking over everybody. Unidentified vessel, you are in a restricted approach corridor, state your. How did it get there? Check the gate log, check the. Vale enforcement to all traffic, hold position, hold position. Is that a human ship? That's a human ship. What is a human? And under it all, this rising note of something I'd never heard aimed at humanity before. Not laughter. Confusion. And under the confusion, just beginning to bloom, fear. President Aventis sat very still in the command chair. She let it build. She let them shout. She let the whole Threll Junction work itself into a frenzy trying to explain the unexplainable ship sitting calmly in its heart. And then she keyed the broadcast, wide band every channel, so that every ship in the junction, and every station, and the Vale themselves would hear her. And she spoke in galactic standard, slow and clear, and without a shred of apology. She said, "This is the human vessel Marrow. We crossed no gate. We paid no toll. We came here by our own road which we made ourselves and which belongs to no one." A pause. The junction had gone quiet. 50 kilometers of ships and stations, all suddenly listening. We have been told for 200 years that the roads belong to the Vale, that we must wait in your lines and pay your tolls and be grateful for the privilege. We are here to tell you, and to show you, that this is no longer true. Another pause, and then she said the thing I'll remember until I die. You have laughed at us for a very long time. We came a very long way to watch you stop. And she cut the broadcast. And then, in front of the entire assembled galaxy, in front of thousands of ships and the Great Vale Gate and the enforcement sharks and everyone, the Marrow spun up her fold drive. And vanished. Here's the part I didn't see, because I was on the Marrow and we were already gone. But I heard about it later from every direction, because it became the most told story in the galaxy for a while there. When the Marrow vanished, she didn't go far. She folded to a system on the other side of the Veil Gate, a system you could only reach, supposedly, by crossing the gate and paying the toll, a system that the gate log would show no human ship had entered. And the Marrow sat there on the far side for exactly 10 minutes, long enough for the news to fold, no, to fly the old way by comm relay across the gate, long enough for everyone at the junction to confirm it. The human ship had crossed to the other side, without using the gate, without paying, without permission. The one thing that could not be done. And then, 10 minutes later, the Marrow folded back to the junction side, appeared for exactly 5 seconds right beside the gate again, just to make the point, just so nobody could say it was a trick or a sensor error, and then folded away into deep space and was gone. I want to tell you what it was like on the bridge in those minutes. Nobody cheered. I think people expect that. They expect that when you pull off the impossible thing, the thing your whole species has been dreaming about, there's cheering and hugging and tears. There wasn't, not at first. It was too big for cheering. We sat at our stations in this ringing silence, and I looked around and everybody had the same expression. This stunned, hollow, wide-eyed look, like people who have just survived something and haven't decided yet whether to believe they're alive. President Aventis was the first to move. She let out a breath, one long, slow breath like she'd been holding it for years, maybe for her whole life, and she put her face in her hands, just for a second. And when she took her hands away, her eyes were wet, but she wasn't crying exactly. She was just full, too full to hold it all in her face. And then she looked around the bridge at all of us, and she said, very quietly, "We did it." And that's when it broke. That's when somebody started laughing, this disbelieving, giddy laugh, and then somebody else, and then all of us. And it wasn't the galaxy's kind of laughter, the cruel, gentle kind. It was the other kind. The kind that comes out when the thing you were most afraid of turns out to be survivable after all. We laughed and we grabbed each other, and somebody was crying and somebody was pounding the console, and I remember I just kept saying, "It worked, it actually worked," like a fool, like I hadn't been there for the whole thing. 51 humans in a dark ship in deep space, laughing and weeping and holding on to each other. Because for the first time in 200 years, the galaxy had been surprised by us. And it was afraid. Now, I want to be honest with you about what came next, because this is where the story people usually tell gets it wrong. People tell it like the Marrow pulled off her stunt at the junction, and then the galaxy just rolled over. Like the Veil saw what we could do and gave up. Like it was easy after that. It was not easy after that. It was the opposite of easy, because the Veil did not roll over. The Veil had ruled the roads for 10,000 years, and they did not intend to lose them to a species they'd put in the corner. And when President Aventis broke their oldest law in front of the whole galaxy, they did exactly what everyone was afraid they'd do. They moved to correct us. We learned about it fast. That was one of the things the Marrow changed: information. Because we could fold, we could carry news faster than any comm relay, faster than any gate-crossing courier. We could be places before word of us arrived. And so when the Veil started to move, we knew almost before they did. They didn't cut our gate access. That was the first surprise. Everybody expected them to do to us what they'd done to the Juno: shut the gates, seal us in, let us starve. But they didn't. And it took me a while to understand why, and when I did, I understood how clever President had been. They couldn't seal us in, because sealing us in didn't work anymore. We didn't need the gates. Cut off human gate access, and all we'd do is fold around it, and every time we did, we'd prove again to the whole watching galaxy that the gates weren't the only road. The Veil's oldest weapon, the threat that had ruled 1,000 worlds, it just didn't work on us. For the first time in the history of the galaxy, the Veil had an enemy they couldn't starve. So they went to the other tool, the one they almost never used because they almost never had to. They went to war. The Veil didn't have much of a military. They'd never needed one. When you control the only roads, you don't need warships. You just close the road on anyone who defies you. But they had some. And more importantly, they had leverage. They had 10,000 years of favors and debts and threats hanging over every other race in the galaxy, and they called those debts in. They went to the Korathi and they said, "Help us destroy the humans or we reconsider your trade privileges." They went to the Senate and they said, "Fund this war or we freeze your accounts at every gate." They went to a dozen races and they made a dozen threats, and slowly, reluctantly, a fleet started to gather. Not a huge fleet. That's important. The other races didn't want this war. They were being dragged into it. The Korathi captains grumbled. The Senate paid under protest. Nobody actually wanted to be there, because everybody, deep down, was starting to wonder the same thing. If the humans could build their own road, could we build one too? And if we could, why were we still paying the Veil's toll? That was the crack. That was the thing Present had seen from the very beginning, on that observation deck with the terrible coffee. The whole galaxy was a cage, and everybody in it hated the cage, and they only stayed because they thought there was no way out. And now there was a way out. And every race the Veil dragged into this war was a race that was secretly, quietly, starting to resent the Veil for making them fight to keep a cage they'd all like to leave. But resentment is slow, and the fleet gathered anyway. Because the Veil still held the debts, and the threats were still real, and nobody was ready yet to be the first to defy them. Nobody except us. The Veil fleet gathered at a system called Corinth's Hollow. It was a staging point, a wide empty system with a dead star, chosen because it was close to human space, but far enough that we supposedly couldn't reach it without crossing 3 gates they controlled. Supposedly. We reached it in an afternoon. We folded in at the edge of the system, dark and quiet, far enough out that they didn't see us, and we watched them gather. And I want to tell you, when I saw that fleet, my stomach dropped because it was big. 40 ships, maybe 50. Korathi cruisers, Threll warships, Veil enforcement craft, a handful of others. Real warships. Ships built by races who'd been building warships for longer than we'd been a species. And there was one of us. The Marrow. 400 meters of dark composite and Gideon Veil's hate. 1 ship, 51 crew against a fleet. I remember I turned to Present and I said, "We can't fight that. There's 50 of them." And she didn't take her eyes off the display. She just said, "We're not going to fight all of them. We're going to fight the way we were built to fight. We're going to fight like people who make their own roads." And I didn't understand what she meant. Not yet. Here's the thing about the fold drive that nobody in that Veil fleet understood, because nobody in the galaxy had ever had one before. Every other ship in existence moved in straight lines. Fast straight lines, sure, but straight lines. To get from here to there, you pointed your ship at there and you burned, and everybody could see you coming, and everybody could plan for where you'd be. The Marrow didn't move in lines. The Marrow moved in blinks. She could be at the edge of a battle and then in the space of a held breath be in the center of it. She could line up a shot, take it, and be gone before the shot even landed. She could appear behind a cruiser's engines, put a torpedo into them, and fold away before the escorts even turned. She didn't fight like a ship. She fought like a ghost, like a rumor, like the thing that hides under the bed when you're a child. That's never where you look. Present had a name for it. She called it fighting from nowhere. And that afternoon at Corinth's Hollow, in front of the assembled might that the Veil had gathered to correct us, she showed the galaxy what it meant. I'm not going to pretend I remember the battle cleanly. Nobody remembers a battle cleanly. It's fragments. It's flashes. It's your own heartbeat too loud in your ears and your hands moving on the controls faster than your brain, and moments that last forever and hours that vanish. But I'll tell you what I remember. I remember Present giving the order, calm as anything. Fold to point one, and the smear and the lean, and then we were right on top of a Korathi cruiser, close enough to see the individual plates of its hull, and I remember firing, my hands doing it before I decided to, putting 3 torpedoes into the gap between its engine pods, the gap that Gideon Vale had taught us all Korathi cruisers had, the weak spot they never bothered to armor because nobody had ever gotten close enough to hit it. And I remember the cruiser coming apart, not exploding, not like in the stories, just breaking, splitting along a seam, the two halves drifting apart, atmosphere venting in long white plumes. And I remember thinking, clear as day, that's a real warship and we just killed it. And I didn't have time to feel anything about that because Present was already saying, fold to point two. Smear, lean. And we were somewhere else behind a Threll vessel this time, and I was firing again, and the Threll ship's shields flared and held. They had better shields than the Korathi, and Present said again. And I fired again, same spot, and this time they cracked, and she said fold before I could even confirm the hit, and we were gone. That's how it went. Blink, strike, gone. Blink, strike, gone. We never stayed anywhere longer than a few seconds. We never gave them a target. Every time they turned their guns to where we weren't there anymore. Every time they tried to form up, to bring their numbers to bear, we hit them from a direction that numbers couldn't defend. 50 ships and they couldn't touch us. 50 ships, and we were carving them apart one at a time, appearing and vanishing, striking from nowhere, and I could hear it on their comms. We were still listening to their comms. I could hear the confusion turning to panic, turning to something close to despair. Where is it? Where is it? It was just here, it was right. We can't hit what we can't. Vale command, we need to withdraw. We cannot fight this, we cannot. And then it went wrong. It always goes wrong. That's the part the stories leave out. You think they had a magic ship they couldn't lose, but the fold drive wasn't magic. It was a machine, built in secret out of scavenged parts, and machines fail, and ours failed at the worst possible moment. We'd folded in for another strike, right into the thick of them, and I'd fired and Present said fold, and nothing happened. The drive didn't spin up. There was a sound instead, a wrong sound, a grinding shriek from deep in the ship, and the lights flickered, and I heard Present's voice change for the first time all day, heard the comm crack just slightly as she said, drive, talk to me. Drive. And the answer came back over the intercom from engineering from a young woman named Sixto who ran the fold drive with her own 2 hands, and her voice was tight with fear. Overload in the fold coils. We pushed it too hard, too many jumps too fast. It needs to cool. I need 4 minutes. Maybe 5. 4 minutes. And we were sitting in the middle of a Vale warfleet, dead in the water, no fold, no ghost, no nowhere to strike from. Just a 400-meter human ship, suddenly a target, suddenly a thing that could be seen and aimed at and hit. And the Vale fleet, for the first time all day, saw exactly where we were. I have never heard a silence like the one on that bridge. Every one of us understood, in the same instant, what had happened. We understood that the trick was over, that we were about to find out whether a single human ship could survive standing still in front of 50 enemies that wanted us dead. And on the enemy comms I heard the tone change again, heard the panic curdle into something hungry, heard a Korathi commander's voice, sharp with vengeance. It stopped. The human ship has stopped. All vessels converge, kill it now while it's blind. And the whole fleet turned toward us. 50 ships, every gun in the system, swinging around to point at one small dark ship that had just run out of miracles. I looked at Present. I don't know what I expected. Fear, maybe, or resignation, or that hollow look people get when they know it's over. That's not what I saw. What I saw was Present Aventis sitting very straight in the command chair, watching the fleet converge and thinking. Just thinking. Fast and cold and clear, the way she'd thought her whole life, the way she'd thought when the galaxy told her the fold drive was impossible, and she'd done the math and found out it wasn't. And she keyed the intercom and she said, "Sixto, I don't need the drive to fold far, I need it to fold once. Short. The shortest jump it can make. Can you give me one short jump?" A pause, then Sixto's voice uncertain. "Maybe, one, short. If I dump the whole reserve into a single coil, but it'll burn the coil out, we won't get another for an hour, maybe more, we'll be dead in space after." "One jump," Present said. "That's all I need, charge it." "Tell me when." And then she turned to me, and she said something that made no sense to me at all in that moment. She said, "Get me a firing solution on the gate." I stared at her. "The gate? What gate? There's no gate here, it's a dead system, there's no." "Not a gate," she said. "The Vale flagship. It's a mobile gate node. It's how they were going to seal human space. They brought it to generate a suppression field to stop us folding. It's the big one in the center. See it?" I saw it. Of course I saw it. It was the largest ship in the fleet, a Vale vessel, pale and smooth and terrible, easily twice the size of anything else out there. It had been hanging back in the center of the formation, protected, and I'd assumed it was a command ship. But Present had understood what it really was. She'd understood the whole time. "That ship," she said, "is a gate. A small one, a mobile one, but a gate. And gates run on folded space, same as us. And if it's generating a suppression field to stop our drive," she almost smiled, "then right now it is the single most concentrated point of folded space in this entire system. It is a bomb. It just doesn't know it yet." And I understood. All at once I understood what she was going to do. "Sixto," Present said, "the one jump I need it to put us right next to that flagship, point blank, as close as the fold can place us." "That's," Sixto's voice cracked, "that's suicide, that's right in the middle of them, we'll have every gun." "We'll have 2 seconds, Present said. "That's all I'm asking for, 2 seconds next to that ship. Then it won't matter what guns they have because there won't be a fleet anymore." She looked at me. "Combat, listen to me. When we fold in, you will have one shot. One. Everything we've got into the flagship's fold core. You put it right into the heart of that suppression field and you do not miss. Do you understand me?" I understood. God help me, I understood. "Charge the jump," Present said. "And somebody," her voice caught just for a second, just once, and then steadied, "somebody tell the crew I'm proud of them. Whatever happens, tell them Gideon would be proud too." I want to slow down here. I've told this part fast before when people ask. I've rushed it because it's hard to sit in. But you deserve the slow version. You deserve to know what those seconds were really like, because they were the most important seconds of my life, and I think they were the most important seconds in the whole history of my people, and things like that shouldn't be rushed. So, the fold coils were burning out. Sixto was dumping everything the Marrow had into one single coil, one last jump, and the ship was groaning around us like a living thing in pain. The lights had gone red. The air had that hot metal smell you get when a machine is being asked to do more than it was built for. And out beyond the viewport, 50 warships were closing in, tightening the net, and I could see their guns charging, these little points of light blooming all across the enemy formation, each one a weapon that was about to be pointed at us. I had my hands on the firing controls. I'd already locked everything the Marrow carried, every torpedo, every lance, every last thing Gideon Vale had built into her, all of it slave to a single trigger. One shot, everything at once, into the heart of that Vale flagship. And I remember thinking about my father. I don't know why, of all the moments. But I thought about him crouched down next to me on that docking ring, 9 years old in my 2 big boots, and the Korathi trader laughing, and my father telling me, he said we build things like we're afraid of them. And I thought, we're not afraid anymore, Dad, look at us, look what we built. Coil charged, Sixto said, her voice was barely there. One jump, it's going to burn out the second we use it. After this we're a rock in space. I'm sorry, it's all I've got. "It's enough," Present said. "It's everything." And then to all of us, quiet, on my mark. The fleet closed in. The guns finished charging. Mark. The smear. The lean. And then we were there. Right next to it, so close I could have reached out and touched it. The Vale flagship filled the entire viewport, this vast pale wall of a ship, smooth and terrible and ancient, and at its heart, glowing through the hull, visible even from outside, a churning knot of folded space that was the suppression field, the thing they'd brought to cage us, the most concentrated point of fold energy in the entire system. And it was right there, naked, undefended, because they'd never imagined anyone could reach it. I had my 2 seconds. I used one of them to aim. I used the other to fire. I've been asked what it felt like pulling that trigger, and the honest answer is it didn't feel like anything. There wasn't time to feel. My hand closed, and everything the Marrow had left in her went screaming out across that tiny gap, and straight into the glowing heart of the Vale flagship, into the churning knot of folded space, into the bomb that didn't know it was a bomb. And then, I don't have the words. I've tried. I've tried for years to find the words for what happened when all that concentrated fold energy came apart at once, and I don't have them, and I don't think anyone does, because nobody had ever seen it before, and I hope nobody ever sees it again. The flagship didn't explode. Explosion is too small a word. The fold core came apart, and for one impossible instant, space itself came apart with it. There was a light that wasn't light. There was a sound that traveled through no air, and yet I heard it, felt it, in my teeth, in my bones, in the roots of my hair. The flagship folded in on itself. All 50,000 meters of it folded down to nothing, and as it went it dragged the space around it and the ships nearest to it. They were just gone, not destroyed. Gone, folded away into whatever place the flagship went, swallowed by the wound it tore in the universe as it died. And the shockwave, the fold wave, Present called it later, rolled outward across the entire system, and it caught the rest of the fleet, and it threw them like leaves in a storm. Ships tumbling, formations shattered, drives failing all across the system as the wave scrambled every fold-based system it touched. And the Marrow rode it out. Barely. Barely. We were closest of all. We should have been the first swallowed, but Present had known. She'd done the math. She'd always done the math. She'd known that being close enough to fire meant being close enough to be inside the eye of it, in the still point at the center where the wave hadn't formed yet. We were thrown. We were battered. Half our systems went dark. Sixto's coil burned out exactly as she'd said, and we hung there in space, powerless, wounded, drifting. But we were alive. And the Vale fleet was not. When the light faded and my eyes worked again and I could see out the viewport, I saw a system full of wreckage. Where the flagship had been, there was nothing, just a faint shimmer in space, a scar, a place where the universe hadn't quite healed. And scattered all around it, the fleet. What was left of the fleet? Ships tumbling dead in space. Ships venting atmosphere. Ships with their drives dark, their weapons cold, their crews, the ones still alive, doing exactly what humans had done for 200 years. Sitting in the dark, powerless and afraid. Only now it was them. The comms came back before our engines did. Sixto got the receivers working, and the bridge filled with the sound of the enemy fleet, and it was not the sound of a fleet that wanted to keep fighting. It was the sound of a fleet that wanted to go home. All vessel, cease fire, cease fire. The flagship is gone, the Vale ship is gone, they're gone. Korathi command to any surviving vessel, we are withdrawing, we are withdrawing. This was never our war. Did you see it? Did you see what it did to the fold ship? If it can do that to a Vale vessel, it can do that to anyone. It can do that to us. In one voice, a Threll captain, I think, speaking not to their fleet but almost to themselves, almost in wonder, almost in horror. We were told they were nothing. We were told they were the young race, the small race, the ones who build afraid. We were told to laugh at them. A long pause. Nobody is laughing now. We didn't fire another shot. We couldn't have, even if we'd wanted to. The Marrow was spent, powerless, a rock in space, just like Sixto said. But even when our engines came back an hour later, we didn't fire, because we didn't need to. The fleet was leaving. What was left of it? Limping away on damaged drives, back toward the gates, back toward home, and every single ship in it carried a crew that had seen what one human ship could do and would tell the story. And the story would spread across the galaxy faster than any comm relay could carry it. Present ordered us to hold position, to be seen, to let them leave, and to let them see us watching them leave, whole and unbroken and unafraid, in the middle of a system full of the wreckage of the fleet that had come to correct us. And then, when the last enemy ship had folded away, she keyed the broadcast one more time, wideband, every channel, so the whole retreating fleet would hear it and carry it home. She didn't gloat. That's the thing I've always been proudest of. She had every right to gloat, and she didn't. Her voice, when she spoke, was almost gentle. She said, "This is the Marrow. We did not want this fight. We have never wanted a fight. For 200 years we asked only to be left alone, to dig our rocks and build our lives in the corner you gave us, and you would not even leave us that. You laughed at us, and then when we stopped being funny, you came to destroy us." A pause. "We will not seek revenge for this. We are not going to come for your worlds. We do not want your worlds. But hear this, all of you, and carry it home and tell your children. The roads do not belong to the Veil anymore. They never did. They belong to anyone brave enough to build their own. We built ours. So can you, and any race in this galaxy that wants to know how." Her voice caught and then steadied, and she finished. "The humans will teach you, freely, because we know what it's like to be laughed at, and we would not wish it on anyone." And she cut the broadcast. And the galaxy was quiet. I want to tell you what happened after, because the battle wasn't the end. The battle was the beginning. Present kept her word. That was the masterstroke, the thing that Gideon Vale never lived to see, the thing that made the Marrow more than just a warship. She gave the fold drive away. Not to everyone at once. That would have been chaos. But she opened a channel. She let it be known that any race that wanted to learn to build their own road could send scientists to human space, and we would teach them freely, asking nothing in return. And do you understand what that did? Do you understand how completely it broke the veil? Because now it wasn't just humanity that could escape the cage. Now it was everyone, and the veil couldn't threaten everyone. They couldn't correct everyone. They couldn't cut the gate access of the entire galaxy at once, because the entire galaxy no longer needed their gates. One by one, race by race, the peoples of the galaxy came and learned to fold. And one by one, race by race, they stopped paying the toll and stopped waiting in the lines and stopped being afraid. The veil didn't fall in a day. Empires don't. It took years. There were more fights, smaller ones, uglier ones, the desperate thrashing of a power that knew it was ending. But the outcome was never in doubt after Corinth's Hollow. The Veil had ruled for 10,000 years on a single foundation, that they controlled the only roads. And a woman from a research base with no name, working in secret in a played-out asteroid, had done the math and found out it wasn't true. I saw the Korathi trader again, years later. The same one from the docking ring from when I was 9. I'm almost sure it was him. They live a long time, the Korathi, and I never forgot that face. It was at a summit, a gathering of races held in human space to work out the shape of the galaxy that was coming, the one with no veil on top of it, the one where the roads belonged to everyone. Humanity was hosting. Do you understand that? Humanity was hosting. The young race, the small race, the ones who build afraid, we were hosting the summit that would decide the future of the galaxy because we were the ones who'd made that future possible and everyone knew it. And I was there because I'd been on the Marrow, and being on the Marrow meant something now. It meant everything. And I saw the Korathi trader across the room in his shimmering coat, and I watched him. I watched him move through a crowd of races who had once looked up to the Korathi, and I watched them not look up to him anymore. I watched him be, for the first time in his long life, just one more person in a room full of equals. And at one point our eyes met, across the room, and I don't know if he recognized me. I was a grown man now, not a boy in two big boots, but he held my gaze for a moment, and there was something in his face I'd never seen on a Korathi before, back when I was young. Uncertainty, and under it maybe the smallest beginning of respect. He didn't laugh. I thought about my father, gone by then, his lungs in the end like everybody said they would be. Gone before he could see any of this. And I thought, I wish you were here, I wish you could see. We don't build things afraid anymore. We built something that made the whole galaxy stop laughing, and now they come to us to learn. I didn't say any of that to the Korathi, I just nodded to him, one nod, equal to equal. And he nodded back. And that, more than the battle, more than the flagship coming apart, more than any of it, that nod was the moment I knew that everything had really changed. President Aventis lived to be old. She never wanted the fame, and she got it anyway, and she carried it the way she carried everything, quietly, without fuss, doing the math. She spent her last decades teaching, not just the fold drive, anyone could teach that by then, but the other thing. The thing that was harder to teach. The thing about knowing you can win, and how once you know it, staying in the cage isn't humility anymore. It's just cowardice with better manners. I visited her near the end. She was very old and very small, and her hands shook, but her eyes were still that clear, and she still didn't answer fast. She still thought before she spoke every time. I asked her, because I'd always wanted to know, I asked her if she'd been afraid. That day at Corinth's Hollow, when the drive burned out and the fleet turned toward us and we were dead in space and it looked like the end of everything. She thought about it for a long time, longer than usual. And then she said, "Of course I was afraid, I was terrified. I thought we were going to die, and I thought maybe I'd killed all of you, and I thought maybe the whole thing had been a mistake, and the galaxy was right about us all along." She looked at me with those clear old eyes. "But you know what I learned that day? You know what I really learned," she said. "Being afraid and being a coward aren't the same thing. I used to think they were. I thought the brave ones were the ones who didn't feel the fear, but that's not it at all. The fear is always there. Everybody feels it. The Korathi felt it, the Veil felt it, we felt it. Being brave just means you do the thing anyway. You do the math, and if the math says you can win, you do the thing and you let yourself be afraid the whole time, and you don't let the fear vote." She smiled. That rare smile. "We were the most afraid species in the whole galaxy," she said. 200 years of being afraid, and it turned out that was our advantage, because we were the only ones who'd learned to act anyway. Everybody else out there, all those proud old races, they'd never really been afraid, not deep down. So when the fear finally came for them that day at the Hollow, they didn't know what to do with it. They ran. She closed her eyes. "But us," she said, "we knew fear like an old friend. We'd been living with it our whole lives. So when it came, we just did the thing anyway, like we always had, like we'd been practicing for that exact moment for 200 years without knowing it." She died not long after that. Peacefully in her sleep, an old woman in a galaxy she'd remade. They wanted to build her a monument, something huge. She'd left instructions against it. All she wanted, she said, was for the Marrow to be kept. Not in a museum sealed behind glass. Kept running. Kept flying. A working ship crewed by young people, going out to the edges of the galaxy where people still needed teaching, still needed the road shown to them. So that's what we did. The Marrow is still out there as far as I know. Old now, older than I am, but still flying, still folding, still making her own road wherever she goes. Gideon Vale's ship. President Aventis's ship, humanity's ship, the one that changed everything. I'm an old man now myself. I've told you this story because I'm one of the last who was there, and when we're gone, it'll only be a story, and stories get smoothed down over time, get turned into legends, get all the fear and the doubt and the burning coils polished right out of them until they're just clean shining tales about a magic ship that couldn't lose. But it wasn't like that. I need you to know it wasn't like that. We were scared. We were poor. We were small. We built things afraid. We waited in lines that would never move for us, and we swallowed insults our whole lives, and we watched a whole galaxy laugh at us, and we mostly just took it, because taking it seemed safer than the alternative. And then a physicist with a strange name did the math, and a bitter old shipwright built his revenge in the dark, and 51 frightened people flew a ship into the heart of everything that had ever looked down on them, and they were afraid the entire time, and they did it anyway. That's the story, that's the whole story. Not that we were fearless, that we were afraid and we did it anyway. The galaxy laughed at us for 200 years. And then one ship, built in the dark by people who refused to keep swallowing it, went out and did one impossible thing in front of everyone. And the whole galaxy went quiet, all at once, like somebody had finally turned off a sound that had been playing my entire life. And in that quiet, for the first time, we heard ourselves. And what we heard was, we were never as small as they told us we were. We just had to build one thing that wasn't afraid to find out.